The ship that arrived at the Galactic Convergence Station was not military. It was not sleek. It had no weapons arrays glowing along its hull, no escort fleet fanning behind it like a threat display. It was a single vessel, roughly the size of what the Velhari Council would classify as a mid-range courier craft, and it was broadcasting on every open frequency simultaneously, not in code, not encrypted, not filtered through diplomatic channels. Raw, open, loud, like someone screaming in a quiet library on purpose. Ambassador Savelle of the Velhari pressed all four of her sensory membranes flat against the sides of her head, the biological equivalent of a wince, and turned to her communications officer. Is it damaged? No, Ambassador. Is the crew in distress? No, Ambassador. Then why are they broadcasting like that? The communications officer, a young Velhari named Preeth, had only been stationed at the Convergence for 14 months. He had never encountered a human transmission before. He pulled the signal apart layer by layer the way his training taught him, looking for the hidden message beneath the noise, the coded subtext beneath the surface frequency. There was none. I believe, Preeth said slowly, they want to be heard. Savelle stood from her chair. At full height she was nearly 3 meters tall, her elongated torso tapering into 4 lower limbs she used interchangeably for walking or gripping. Her people had evolved on a world of dense atmospheric pressure, and so her movements were always deliberate, always measured. The Velhari did not rush. They did not broadcast openly. They did not arrive without appointment. They had, over 600 years of interstellar civilization, built an entire culture around the idea that power whispers. Put them through, she said. The face that appeared on the display screen was human. Female. Middle-aged by human standards, which meant lines around the eyes and a stillness in the jaw that comes from having been through things. She wore no uniform. Just a dark grey jacket and an expression that Preeth, despite his limited human reading experience, immediately understood as, I am not here to negotiate. My name is Dr. Carla Reeves, the woman said. I am not a diplomat. I am not a military officer. I am a Xenosystems analyst from a planet called Earth, and I have been authorized by the full body of Earth's Unified Governance Council to deliver one message to the Galactic Convergence and all member civilizations within broadcast range. She paused. Not for effect. For breath. Like the weight of the words had physical mass. 14 months ago, a coalition of 3 Convergence member species launched coordinated attacks on 4 human colony settlements in the Davan Reach. 1,219 people died. Children, farmers, teachers, people who had never held a weapon. The channel was completely silent. Even the background hum of the station seemed to dim. Earth has spent 14 months deciding how to respond. Carla looked directly into the camera. We have reached our decision. I am here to deliver it. And I need every senior representative of every Convergence member to be in the same room when I do. Not screens. Not proxies. Not translation matrices. The actual decision makers. In person. She let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. You have 6 hours. While the Convergence scrambled, Savelle walked to the deep archive room on the station's lower tier and stood alone in the dark for a while. She had been 11 years old, a Velhari child, still in her first molting cycle, when Earth had been formally introduced to the Galactic Convergence. She remembered the broadcasts, the debates, the arguments among the elder council members about whether to make contact at all. Humans were young, emotionally volatile. Their technology was primitive in certain elegant ways and inexplicably advanced in others that the Convergence's scientists still argued about at conferences. They did not share the Convergence's foundational philosophy of measured coexistence, the idea that all civilizations exist in a state of permanent fragile balance and that disrupting that balance, even in small ways, carries generational consequences. The Velhari had learned measured coexistence through catastrophe. 3,000 years ago, 2 Velhari city-states had gone to war over a water source. The war lasted 40 years. When it ended, both cities were gone and the water source was poisoned for 2 centuries. That event was called the Tavel Silence, and every Velhari child learned it before they learned mathematics. Humans, as far as Savelle could tell, had 1,000 table silences in their history and had drawn completely different conclusions from each one. She didn't know whether that made them dangerous or wise or simply something the convergence's existing frameworks had no proper category for. What she did know, what she had argued in 17 closed-session council meetings over the past 14 months, was that the attack on the Devon Reach settlements had been a mistake of catastrophic proportion. Not morally. Sewell was a diplomat. She didn't traffic in moral certainties. Strategically, operationally, fundamentally, the three species involved, the Chorath, the Mean Collective, and the Durath Sovereignty, had believed they were sending a signal. A pressure application. A classic convergent-style territorial message. You are expanding too fast. Pull back. They had not understood that humans do not read pressure applications the way other civilizations do. The Velhari, when pressured, recalculate. The Chorath, when pressured, posture and then withdraw. The Mean Collective, when pressured, fragment into subfactions and negotiate internally for years. Humans, when pressured, when their people are killed, go very, very quiet. And then they come to you directly. Without armor. Without an army behind them. With a woman in a grey jacket who asks for 6 hours and means it. Sewell had spent 14 months afraid of this meeting. She was still afraid. But there was something else underneath the fear now. Something that felt, uncomfortably, like curiosity. They gave her the central deliberation chamber. It was the largest formal space on the Convergence Station, designed to accommodate the biological diversity of 12 species simultaneously. Different atmospheric pockets separated by transparent pressure membranes, different gravity zones on raised platforms, temperature gradients built into the floor. Carla Reeves walked in without a translator unit. She had learned enough of the common convergence trade language, called shared, to deliver her message directly. Not fluently. Not perfectly. But directly. Sewell, watching from her designated position, felt something shift in the room when the council members realized this. The Chorath delegation, 6-limbed, exoskeletal, arranged in their traditional defensive semicircle, went very still. Carla stood at the center of the room where the acoustics were best and looked around at every delegation in turn. Slowly. Without rushing. She had the patience of someone who has already decided. I want to tell you something about Earth before I deliver our response, she said, in shared, her accent thick but her meaning clean. Because I think you made a decision about us without understanding us. And that matters. Not for sympathy, I'm not here for sympathy, but because what I'm about to say will only make sense if you understand who we are. She reached into her jacket and removed a small flat device. She held it up. This is a photograph. My species still uses photographs. Physical ones. Some of us. A small, private smile crossed her face. This is a picture of a town called Myra Station. It was one of the 4 settlements attacked in the Devon Reach. Before the attack, it had a population of 308 people. It had a school, a medical clinic, a bakery. The people there grew a grain crop that only grows in low-gravity environments. They had figured out after 6 years of failure how to make it produce enough yield to actually feed a community. 6 years. She lowered the photograph. That bakery made bread from that grain. I have eaten that bread. It tasted like something between wheat and something that doesn't have a name in any language yet. The room was silent. Myra Station does not exist anymore. She put the photograph away. Earth is not going to go to war with you, she said. I want to be completely clear about that. We are not here to declare war. We are not positioning fleets. We are not calling for reparations or sanctions through convergence legal channels. The Chorath lead delegate, a creature called Hasfreth, shifted its weight between 3 of its 6 limbs. This was, Sewell knew, the Chorath gesture for confusion bordering on suspicion. Then what, Hasfreth said, are you here for? Carla looked at it directly. I'm here to show you what we built. What followed was 3 hours of presentation. Not threats. Not military intelligence. Not a display of weapon systems or fleet positioning or any of the traditional tools of interstellar pressure that the Convergence's oldest civilizations had spent centuries refining. Carla Reeves showed them infrastructure. Specifically, she showed them 14 years of Earth's expansion program in complete technical detail. Every colony site, every resource allocation, every supply chain, every communication relay, the population distribution models, the agricultural development timelines, the medical resource networks, the redundancy systems built into every layer of every settlement so that if one node failed, 12 others absorbed the load and kept functioning. It was the most thorough, most intimate, most disarming thing Savelle had ever seen delivered in a diplomatic context. Because it wasn't a boast. It wasn't "look how powerful we are." It was something stranger and, to Savelle's mind, far more unsettling. It was "look how much we care." Every single data point was annotated not just with technical specifications but with human context. This water reclamation system was designed by a 17-year-old engineer during her university thesis. This crop rotation schedule was developed collaboratively by farmers from 11 different Earth nations who had never met in person. This emergency evacuation protocol had been tested 43 times before it was deployed and had been updated after each test based on feedback from the people who would actually have to use it. The mean collective delegates, who existed as a shifting cluster of interconnected organisms and processed information collectively, had gone so motionless they appeared to have stopped functioning. Savelle had never seen the mean go still before. They were always moving, always reconfiguring. They were still now. Because they understood, perhaps better than anyone else in the room, what they were seeing. The mean built collective systems too. They understood the philosophy of interconnection. They understood what it meant to build something where every part depended on every other part. They understood what it meant to destroy one node of such a system. Carla let the final dataset hang in the air, a three-dimensional map of the Davin Reach, with the 4 destroyed settlements marked in white, and then she spoke again. "You thought you were sending a message to a government," she said. "You weren't. You were sending a message to a network. And networks remember differently than governments do. Governments can be pressured into silence. Networks just reroute." This is where everyone in the room expected the threat. Savelle could feel it, the collective tension of 12 species all bracing simultaneously. The Durath sovereignty delegates, who had the most to lose given their lead role in the Davin Reach attack, had arranged themselves in a tight cluster near the back of their atmospheric zone. The Chorath had shifted into a fully defensive posture. Even the neutral observer species, the Phelan, the Grath Communion, had gone guarded. Everyone was waiting for Carla Reeves to say, "And if you do it again, here is what we will do to you." She didn't. 6 months after the Davin Reach attack, Carla said, Earth's Unified Governance Council convened an emergency session. It lasted 11 days. I was there for all of it. There were people in that room who wanted to respond with force. Significant force. We have the capacity. That's not a boast. I think most of you already know that and have been factoring it into your calculations for years. A pause. There were people who wanted sanctions. People who wanted to formally withdraw from convergent structures. People who wanted to do nothing and absorb the loss and move forward quietly. She looked around the room. We argued for 11 days. And then we voted. What was the vote? The Phelan observer asked. Quietly. Almost despite themselves. To come here, Carla said. To show you what you destroyed. To tell you what we are actually building out there. Not to threaten you. Not to punish you. She took a breath. To make you understand what you risk if you do it again. Not because of what we'll do to you. But because of what will be gone forever from the universe. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones before it. Then the mean collective did something Savelle had never seen in 30 years of diplomacy. They spoke in unison. All of them. One voice from 100 bodies. The grain, they said. The bread. The thing with no name yet. It will not exist again. No, Carla said. The people who grew it are dead. The seeds they were cultivating are gone. 6 years of work. It won't exist again. The mean made a sound. It had no translation in shared. Savelle looked at Preeth. He shook his head slightly. No translation existed because no convergent species had a word for the specific grief of an irreplaceable thing unmade. Humans, Savelle realized with a slow, cold clarity, probably did. The Chorith lead delegate broke the silence. HFY was old enough that its outer exoskeletal plates had developed the secondary ridge formations that indicated a full century of adult life. It had been in diplomacy for 60 years. It had negotiated border treaties, resource agreements, and one ceasefire that had held for 40 years and counting. It spoke slowly, the way old Chorith spoke, each word placed like something being set down carefully on a fragile surface. You said, HFY began, that you are not here to threaten us. Correct, Carla said. And yet. HFY's primary optical cluster fixed on her. The message you have delivered today is the most effective threat I have encountered in 60 years of practice. Something moved across Carla's face. Not quite a smile. Not quite grief. Something between. I know, she said. Because a military threat calculates casualties and weighs them against objectives, HFY continued, almost speaking to itself now. A military threat has a shape. It can be analyzed, countered, negotiated. But you have not given us a shape. The old Chorith was quiet for a moment. You have given us a feeling. Yes. That is a much harder thing to defend against. I know that too. HFY made a gesture with its uppermost limbs that Savell recognized as a Chorith expression of acknowledgement toward an equal. You are a very unusual diplomat, Dr. Reeves. I told you at the start, Carla said. I'm not a diplomat. No, HFY agreed. You are something we don't have a category for. The Durath sovereignty had not spoken once during the entire session. This was unusual. The Durath were typically the loudest, most assertive presence in any convergence gathering. They were a species built around the concept of claimed space, the philosophical and territorial idea that the universe was divided into what you had earned and what you had not yet taken. Their civilization had expanded aggressively for 4 centuries. They had never lost a direct confrontation. Their lead delegate was called Magistrate Vaughan. It was tall even by Durath standards, its silver-grey hide marked with the territorial patterns of its highest authority caste. It had sat motionless through 3 hours of Carla's presentation with an expression that Savell could not read. When Vaughan finally spoke, its voice was low. Almost private. We led the Davon Reach operation, it said. Not an apology. A statement of fact. The decision was mine. Every head in the room turned. Carla faced it directly. Said nothing. We believed the human expansion into the Davon Reach was a territorial claim, Vaughan said. We responded as we respond to territorial claims. This is our framework. This is how the Durath have always operated. A pause. I'm telling you this not to excuse it. I'm telling you this because I watched your presentation for 3 hours and I understand, now, that we were wrong about what we were looking at. What did you think you were looking at? Carla asked. Expansion. Acquisition. The early stages of an empire building its edges outward. And now? Vaughan was quiet for a long moment. People, it said. Making a home. The word, home, sat in the room like something physical. The Durath concept closest to home was Vrathsol, which translated roughly as the space you have bled for. It was tied entirely to conflict, to cost, to the price paid in struggle. The idea that a home could be made through grain cultivation and school construction and 6 years of agricultural failure and a bakery making bread that tasted like something without a name, this did not fit the Durath framework. Savell watched Vaughan process this in real time. She watched it reach the edges of its own cultural vocabulary and find nothing there. She had spent 30 years in diplomacy and she had never seen a Durath magistrate look lost before. Carla Reeves reached into her jacket one more time. She removed a second device. Smaller than the first. She set it on the central table where the station's broadcast systems could pick it up and transmit it to every screen in the room simultaneously. It was a recording. The recording showed a room on Earth. Spare, functional, lit with the flat white light of a government building at 3 a.m. A long table. Exhausted people in various states of formal and informal dress. Some had their heads in their hands. Some were staring at screens. Some were just staring. The recording had no audio. It was just an image. This is the Unified Governance Council, Carla said, at our 244 of the emergency session. This is what 14 months of deciding looks like. She looked at the image herself for a moment. These are people who lost friends. Some of them lost family members in the Devon Reach. Every single one of them chose this instead of the other thing. She turned back to the room. Earth's warning is this, she said, and her voice shifted slightly. Still calm, still direct, but with a weight underneath it now that hadn't been there before. We will not strike first. We will not expand into claimed space. We will not respond to political pressure with military force. A breath. But if our people are killed again, if our settlements are attacked, our children are targeted, our work is deliberately unmade, we will not come here first. We will not spend 14 months deciding. We will not send a scientist in a grey jacket to show you photographs. The room was completely still. We will respond. Immediately. Proportionally. With everything we have. She paused. And what we have is more than you have accounted for in any model you've been running. I know you've been running models. I'm asking you to be honest with yourselves about what your models can't predict, which is what a species does when it has run out of patience. She picked up the device and turned off the recording. That's the warning. That's all of it. No hidden message, no follow-up communication, no deadline. Just the truth of who we are and what we will do. She looked around the room one final time. I hope we never have to speak like this again. I genuinely hope that. Because every time a thing like Myra Station is built, something new comes into existence in this universe. And every time it's destroyed, it is gone in a way that cannot be fixed. She straightened her jacket. I'll see myself out. She was almost to the door when Savell spoke. Dr. Reeves. Carla stopped. Turned. Savell had not planned to say anything. She had been a silent observer the entire session, as protocol required. But something had moved in her that 30 years of diplomatic training had not fully prepared a defense against. The bread, Savell said. The grain that has no name. Is the knowledge truly lost? The method of growing it, the 6 years of adaptation. Carla looked at her for a long moment. Most of it, she said. There were 2 farmers from Myra Station who weren't there during the attack. They were on a supply run to the next settlement over. They survived. A pause. They still have some seeds. They're trying again. Different location. Starting over. Savell absorbed this. They are attempting to rebuild 6 years of work. They're attempting to rebuild everything, Carla said. That's what my species does. There was no pride in her voice when she said it. No boast. Just a kind of plain, tired fact. We start over. We have been starting over for as long as we have existed. We're very good at it. She almost smiled. We're also very tired of having to be. She left. The central deliberation chamber held its silence for a long time after she was gone. The various delegations did not move to their separate communication channels. They did not begin the usual procedural conversations. They simply stayed in the room together, in their separate atmospheric zones, and were quiet. The mean collective, after a long while, made that sound again, the one with no translation. Preeth, sitting beside Savell, pulled up his translation interface and typed a note to himself. He worked at it for several minutes, choosing words carefully. Then he showed the screen to Savell. Proposed translation. The grief of almost things. Things that existed briefly and could have become more but were ended before their name was known. Savell read it. Read it again. That's not a clean translation, she said quietly. No, Preeth agreed. But I think it's the right one. Savell looked at the empty center of the room where Carla Reeves had stood. She thought about a small town that grew bread from a grain with no name. She thought about 2 farmers starting over in a different location with a small envelope of seeds and 6 years of memory and the particular human capacity, inexplicable, structurally impractical, somehow persistent, to begin again. She thought about the table silence and the poisoned water and what her own people had learned from catastrophe. She wondered, for the first time in her 30-year career, whether the convergence had been asking the right question about humanity all along. The question the Convergence had been asking was, how dangerous are they? Savelle thought the better question, the harder question, might be, what are they building? And the follow-up, quieter, underneath. What would it mean to help? She did not say this out loud. She was a diplomat. She would write it in a report. She would submit it through proper channels. She would use measured language and careful framing and the full vocabulary of measured coexistence. But she would write it. Outside the station's viewport, the small human courier ship was already moving away from the dock, heading back toward the Davon Reach, back toward 2 farmers and a handful of seeds and the patient, unreasonable work of making something new in the universe. Savelle watched it until it was gone. END.